This will be the second video of my garden at Calliope Corner in North Eugene. And behind me is the main perennial bed, which is largely designed by the previous owners. And it's been a lot of fun discovering what's there as they come up and start to bloom at different times of the year. I'll also cover the perennial bed that's right in front of the house. They're divided by a walkway. But most of the plants here were put in with insects in mind. A lot of members of the mint and sunflower family for pollinators such as the lepturine beetles and flies, and especially bees, honeybees, bumblebees, and several different genera and family of very small native bees such as mason bees. I've added a few things here and there, some natives, some brushy things, and I'll just go around and try to show you all the plants that are here. So here's this big central perennial bed, and right here in front blooming is the native yarrow, which is the same thing that's coming up all through the former lawn. This was one that had crept from the lawn into the perennial bed, and as I was laying down the cardboard and bark mulch, decided to leave it. I pulled up the ones that are right around the edge, and indeed it has had quite a few pollinators on it. This perennial is here. This is a sort of a straw flower, I think called a status. I think it's interesting to some insects. And I didn't find out what this great big thing was until very recently. This huge mound just dies down completely to the ground in the winter. I was barely aware that it was there, except I cut away the dead branches, but it turns out to be a Salvia guaranitica, and it hasn't quite bloomed yet, but here's the new flower stalk coming on. And my neighbor across the other side of the fence has one in her front yard. She says the hummingbirds love it, and I identified it only from seeing this plant for sale just the past few days at the stores. In their nursery sections, they're actually blooming now, but they probably started them in greenhouses. So I'm looking forward to that for the hummingbirds. These two sunflowers are volunteers. I'm not sure if it's a variety that was planted here last year or if it is from birdseed. I decided to make this something of an herby little corner. The two lavenders were already here, and I trimmed them down entirely. They had grown into one great big bush. I'll try to keep them small in the future. But I planted another lemongrass here, which is grown as an annual in Oregon. It won't survive the winter. I planted a French tarragon, which I thought I had tried to sow. I didn't have any luck with the seeds. They didn't produce anything, but as it turns out, good culinary French tarragon is sterile and can be reproduced only by cuttings or offsets, dividing a perennial. So what I must have sown was a different variety of the same species that's probably not very good for cooking. I started some dill by seed indoors and had very little success. This is the only one of those surviving. And a few days later, I scattered a bunch of seed around in this bed, and I have another 8 or so plants. Here's a parsley that my neighbor gave me that was extra. And I also had a chive seedling that I put in here in the back. It's just barely something there. I have some more chives in the back. This is one of the native camuses, and yeah, everywhere. I don't need to show all of them, but zinnias and marigolds popping up here and there. This fabulous brushy thing here is agastache, mint hyssop. It has pink flowers, orange pink flowers that the bees and the hummingbirds love. In front of it is a coneflower, and there's two coneflowers here. And in pictures from last year, there is a red one and a purple one. So I don't know if these are the same thing or these will be different plants. They look a bit different. They're growing a bit differently. They were already here. In the front here is one of about 5 sea thrifts It's kind of like an onion, and it has these stalks of purple flowers that look kind of like an onion, but it's not even closely related to onion. It's in the plumbago family. That is a liatris, and when I was weeding through here and removing old stuff, and I got rid of a huge patch of bleeding heart that was taking over in here and coming into the front bed. I ended up breaking off some bits and pieces, and I think I got that piece of it over there and a piece of it over here. So I'll have more liatris next year. Let's go around this direction. This is a native milkweed that I bought and stuck in here, and I didn't actually think there was anything in the pot, but there was a squiggly little root. This will be a great big plant that'll grow as tall as this bamboo stake with huge showy flowers. It's Asclepias spectabilis, I believe. This non-native perennial was here. It's a rock rose in the cistus family, and it does kind of spread a bit. It has little bits and pieces that have gone over there, but it's favored by the honeybees. Not much else likes it. Here's another checker mallow that I bought. This is the malviflora. Oh, here's an aster erigeron, fleabane, that's coming open just now, and it looks like it might be the same thing that's on the other side over there, but for some reason is blooming a good 3 weeks later. Here's the mother of the penstemon hybrid that is across the way, across the path. And yeah, bees do like it. They don't seem to notice that it's not fully native. Here's a whole bunch of these volunteer blue columbines everywhere in here. The bees do like them, hummingbirds ignore them. I planted that seed there. That's one of the giant Pike's Peak sunflowers. And that right there is one of 5 okra seedlings seeds I stuck in the ground here. You may or may not get fruit from them. So here's more of this rock rose, this orange rock rose. This fabulous plant here is a red currant. Not the native red flowering currant, but the fruit. And finally I'll be able to make, I won't get much this year, but next year, several of the desserts in the German cookbook I brought back with me from Germany so long ago. What else is in here? There's a lot of these poppy anemones that are among the first flowers to bloom in the spring. And some of them are still blooming. Let's go around this way. Oh, this rocky spot right here is a snake habitat. I guess it goes down pretty deep and they can go down in there to hibernate. Here's one of the chrysanthemums I planted in here. This one is called Cambodian Queen. This will be a beautiful single pink flower. These flax are very, very cheerful, and bees and native flies love them. It has this interesting habit of drooping at the tips, but when the flowers open, yeah, you can focus, can't you? Come on, there. When the flowers open, they poke up. And I'll hopefully save some seed from this and move them deeper into the bed. Not too bad there. Let's see. The sea thrift. So here's the native columbine. I will be scattering a lot more seed of this plant here because the hummingbirds actually feed from this. So next spring this will be full of it. These are more coneflowers here. I'm not sure what they'll look like. I think these are dark red from some photos I could tell last year. This looks like a native penstemon species, somewhere native in the West. Not a hybrid. It doesn't have a more so compact, pretty growth pattern, but it's got wonderful flowers and the bees like it a lot. That's a volunteer sunflower there in front of a different kind of rock rose, different variety of interesting red. This composite here is a perennial that was here already, and I don't know what it is, but I think it's like a white daisy of some kind. This one is called Santa Barbara daisy, and it's an erigeron with a complicated scientific name I can't remember. There's another fleabane that's similar to the purple one I'll show in a second, but this one hasn't started blooming yet. This is a heuchera, one of the things related to coral bells, and I haven't seen much on it. It's very rangy, and I did not do anything to try to reduce it in size this winter, and so that's going to get a big chopping away this next winter. And here's one of the first composites to bloom in the yard this year. This is a Erigeron spectabilis, and here's a pretty fly on it, and over here is a yellow-faced bumblebee. It's a cold day. This little forget-me-not is just a volunteer. Not a difficult plant to control. And this is a yarrow, just like the white one, but this is a cultivar. Ooh, sun's coming out, it's really bright. And even though it's been bred to look completely different from the white one, the bees and flies and other pollinators still like it. Back in here, see, there's one of the anemones. It's still trying to bloom. You like daffodils putting up flowers again and again. I planted a couple of the two queen sunflowers in here, and this nice bush right here will be a major focus in the whole yard as a ocean spray native. This fabulous plant here, I've actually seen the hummingbirds feeding from it, is a hedge nettle or stachys in the mint family. It has a wonderful smell, and I can, there we go, smell it when I brush up against it, weeding in the area. Here's one of the mystery perennials. I do not know what this is. It's like a composite, but I have no idea what color it will be. And in this created this big open area here because this Russian Russian sage had taken over and had grown all the way out to the edge of the path and had put these deep roots all the way over and had grown even into the yarrow. And I found that perennial in amongst it with Russian sage growing up into it, and I had to yank and pull and tear, and I didn't even know this thing would survive. But I made this big open area here. Not sure what to do with it. I put in this trellis and some string beans. So some of them are a bush bean, and then some of them are a climbing pole bean called rattlesnake. This rose is kind of funny. I found it growing behind me along the fence line under the shade of the Fuji apple, which is not a good place for a rose. Roses like full sun here. So I managed to dig up as much of the roots as possible and put it in here to see what it was. And then I asked the previous owner about it. He said he had tried to get rid of it, and it kept coming back, so he finally just left it. And then our neighbors also had some on their side of the fence, and they said it was there when they moved here in the mid-'80s. So this is an older rose individual. It'll probably live to be 100 years old here. Here's some more bush beans that I planted here. A couple more okras are growing back in there. This is a sedum, a perennial non-native that puts up flowers in the late fall and winter. I'm going to walk back in here, show a couple more things. So here's the native checker mallow that was already here. These cute little delicate pink flowers. And one thing I like about native plants is all the different species of insects that they attract, not just pollinators, but I found a painted lady caterpillar on this plant. They're famous for eating thistle, but they have quite a few different hosts. I don't know what happened to it. I let it go here. And then I planted here this black currant, which is the same species as the red currant, but a different variety. This one's called Black September. And again, it's a common European fruit. It's quite hard to find here for some reason. One last plant I think I'll show here is this 9-bark, which is a native shrub, and it's a bit too close to that agastache, which was not a very big plant in the winter, so I'll move one or the other somewhere. And then on the outside here is one more lavender. And then I'm going to cover this perennial bed that's right in front of the house, which I didn't change a whole lot. One thing I did is I added the Ceanothus cuneatus, native shrub. There were no shrubs here at all. Everything is a perennial that dies down to the ground. So, oh no, that's not true. This is a shrub called Phygelius, or Cape honeysuckle, which is not a honeysuckle. No, I'm sorry. Cape fuchsia. And it looks very much like a fuchsia. It even has the opposite leaves, and the leaf shape is very much like fuchsias. But the flowers have superior ovaries, 5 sepals, and 5 petals. And the petals are arranged somewhat irregularly, like a foxglove, and it is indeed the same family as foxglove and snapdragon. And the pollinators are probably sunbirds and sugarbirds and not hummingbirds, but hummingbirds will feed from it. But it's super aggressive. It dies down in the winter if it gets cold, but the roots survive. This thing had runners coming out into the middle of the walkway here and all the way back to the base of this peach tree. So I whacked it way back in February, and it's given the other plants here a lot more space. There's one of the peach trees. It's not doing so well. It has a few peaches, but the squirrels pick them off, take a bite, and leave them. These are the yellow and white irises, which are fully done blooming, and I've deadheaded them all. They weren't always deadheaded in the past, apparently, because the seedlings have popped up here and there around the yard. I put in, let's see, this oregano, parsley, sage is one of the more recent plants that I put in. This is the edible kind of sage. And then right on the other side over here is a non-edible sage, also salvia, that's liked by pollinators. There's a honeybee on it right now. This iris is a purple one, and there's a whole bunch of them around the yard here. It's a Siberian iris, apparently. It's one of my expensive zinnia seedlings. California poppy, volunteers everywhere in the yard. This is probably a volunteer oriental poppy. And there are 3 big peonies in here. They're all the same variety, so I think they're possibly originate from one original plant that's been divided. They started blooming right around May 1st. Before that, and here's some of the volunteer columbines that this one still has a few flowers left on it. It's finishing up. This is a scabiosa, also called pincushion plant, another sea thrift. And here's the other native checker mallow that I showed young ones of a minute ago. These are Sedacia malviflora. This will be blooming in September. This is a goldenrod, considered a weed to Europeans, but it's native here. This is probably not a native species right here in this part of Oregon, but it's native enough that local pollinators love it a lot. I do not know what this perennial is. It might be the same thing that's over there by the green beans. And I started some Monarda by seed, and it's growing like mad. It's very young, and it may or may not bloom this year. Here's another Liatris. Here's a cultivar of Geum, and next to it over here is a native Geum, Geum macrophyllum, with these little yellow flowers. Not nearly as showy, but better for native insects. And back in here, what's in here? A lot of these irises, a lot more columbine. Here's one of the perennial chrysanthemums that I planted. This is Mary Stoker, which I think is a yellow one. You can see the back here. Here's a perennial that I found while I was weeding, and I still don't know what it is. It doesn't have flower buds yet, just these funny leaves. If anyone knows, you can let me know. Volunteer California poppy, and behind it, scarlet monkey flower, which was here already. I planted the rosemary. It was a very sunny spot earlier in the year. It's only become shaded when the iris got so tall and the poppies and everything else grew up around it. Here's one of the Gloriosa daisies from my neighbor, and I put in a couple of sunflowers just because I had extra seed. All these other irises in here are bearded irises that I salvaged from the backyard. Bits and pieces of root I just stuck in the ground, and they're doing quite well. Here's my Meyer lemon, which I wanted to get established, so I removed all of the heavy blossoms and buds that were on it when I planted it, and it promptly went and shot out a whole bunch more flower buds. And it's not supposed to be blooming in June. It's supposed to bloom in maybe in April here. Here's another one of the Siberian irises. And on either side of the Siberian iris I put in a seedling that I started from seed of a passion vine. And if it survives into late in the year, it should go at least halfway up this wall as a nice vine. But I doubt it will produce any fruit this year. This is the passion fruit that's called granadilla in Peru, or Granada Chines in Mexico. You break it open and eat the delicious sweet pulp inside. Here's another native checker mallet I planted. I planted a peppermint, which is going nuts right here, and it'll spread throughout a huge area, which is no problem. I'll pull it out and dry it and make lots of tea. Here's one of the plants I felt sorry for at the store when they were on sale. It was going to die. Little tiny dahlia. It'll be a big, big plant next year. This is an iris relative, and I cannot remember its name, but it's a weed on the southern Oregon coast and very invasive. But it was a huge patch here, and I reduced it just to this small bit. There's I planted this perennial. This is a Biden's. And here's some of the tiger irises, Tigridia, that I saved from the store. Another chrysanthemum from Bluestone. This one is called, let me think, Debutante. And there's a cosmos back there. And here's one of the tomatoes I got a very late start on, starting by seed, and it was flopping over a bit, so I supported it with these bamboos. And this is going to be a bush tomato called Supremo, the Roma type. And this is one of the checker mallows that I planted, and it got established very quickly and put on some flowers. And a dahlia, which from my photos from last year shows to be a very big yellow variety. Big double flowers. This is a comb flower that I salvaged when removing a whole bunch of plants in this area. And here are my fancy zinnias. This is maybe the most advanced of my zinnias. I think this is a alyssum from some seed I scattered about here about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, and those are the perennial beds in the front of the house.